Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Promised Neverland Manga review. This one is going to be for the last chapter, the final chapter of The Promised Neverland, chapter 181, which is called Beyond Destiny. You probably saw earlier on today I put up my live reaction to this chapter where I read through it for the first time on camera and gave some of my thoughts. I'm back now a few hours later to give my full review analysis of this chapter after having had a little bit more time to digest it. I'm going to say straight away that my thoughts haven't really changed for the most part, in that overall I think it's pretty fair to say that this was a relatively disappointing ending to The Promised Neverland. This final chapter didn't really sort of save the last bit of story direction that they had. It ended about, I think, where you expected it to end, which is fair enough because in my mind this series was always going to end on the general note of it is the kids together as a family living together, but this time they're free. It's not this illusion of them being free as we started off the series with. Again, Emma's sort of monologue at the very start of The Promised Neverland, but this time it's true. They're actually free. And just acknowledging that along the way, it was all about Emma's idealism and what she was able to accomplish with that, but that it didn't all go perfectly and sacrifices were made along the way. People were lost, and for Emma specifically, the sacrifice she had to make was her memories, and that's what they're going with. I think there is a core emotional arc that this chapter definitely hit, and hit well, in this series that has overall sort of been about the family of this group that all lives together, just the general family of the cattle children full stop. That core beat works completely. The problem though is that it feels rushed, and I think everyone is saying this about this chapter. There's no way to really view it any other way. That we heard about, the promise. The promise was effectively made back in like chapter 140 or 141. We waited basically 40 chapters to get the reveal of what the reward actually is, and they only left a single chapter to basically deal with the sort of consequences of that. In my mind, to immediately fix the problems of this final chapter, what you needed to do was turn the last, I'd say 2 or 3 chapters into more like 6. Turn it into a final mini arc or extended epilogue, because that's what this final arc effectively is. It is the epilogue for the series. As soon as they transfer over at the end, execute the promise, and they're in the human world, we're basically in the epilogue as far as the story that they're telling is concerned. I think they needed to then make the last bunch of chapters, not just the last 2, be about finding Emma. That way you could have done effectively, I think, what you do in this chapter and the last one, but over a more extended period of time where it feels more kind of earned, where we're questioning over a few chapters of just like, how are they going to get there? And you have a chapter of them just figuring out what to do, them here failing but still wanting it to happen, because I think there is an idea here that is basically here, but it didn't come across as clearly as it could have if it was made into an actual arc. And I think that being the sense that Emma has made this sacrifice to help everyone else, and so she basically gets a chance to start again, and she effectively all works out okay. She meets the old man is going to look after her, she has someone with her, she's living this happy, free life, but there's a sense, she doesn't know what it is exactly, but that she's missing something, so that her life is fine, she's free, but something unknown is missing to her, and she's just waiting for it to basically be fulfilled. Whereas on the other side of things, the rest of the kids, the rest of the family, got the positives that Emma wanted, that they're free in the human world, but the thing that they're missing is Emma. They know what they're missing. Emma doesn't know what's missing from her life. And I think that final arc of just making it just a few more chapters longer, of just the time for those two to meet, is what you needed to have the ending be. And the value in that final arc is that they're apart for a certain amount of time. It doesn't really work when it is just like 2-3 chapters, and it's all happening so quickly right at the end. Like, again, the emotional beats are kind of there in the last chapter and this one to a degree, but you did need that time. It just doesn't work. It feels rushed when you just turn the page from the second last chapter into the last chapter when the volume edition comes out. And it's like, oh, we're just here. Like, they're right onto it. The fact that in the first couple of pages of this chapter, they're just immediately just steamroll through. We don't know where Emma is. 2 years have passed. We'll go to the place that we haven't looked. She'll probably be there. And they find her immediately. You needed that to be across a few more chapters. I'm not saying make it like 50 more chapters or turn it into more of an arc. I know some people wish that there was more of a just general plot arc to like go back to the demon world and resolve something there, resolve an issue in the human world, and then bring the two worlds properly together, united, rather than keeping the two worlds separate. But you have to go back to the promise that was actually made, and part of the promise was that Emma basically asked that for it to be impossible to move between the worlds, that no one can actually transfer between one side of the world and the other. That was a part of the promise. So that to me is why as soon as they leave the demon world, they know there's that idea of they're not coming back. So that's why I was fine ultimately with there not really being any demon stuff here. So the focus has to be on delivering on the human stuff. And like I said, it's this frustrating thing of like the core beats of what you'd expect from a finale for the Promised Neverland is here. It's so difficult to remove yourself from the fact that it's so clear that this is rushed. This is not the most ideal way to end this arc, like, at all. But I'll go through it and I'll explain where I think they could have done stuff a little bit better. So we start off with this idea: finding just one person on this vast planet. It's a tremendous task to accomplish. So this is the entire group all doing everything they can to try and find Emma. They've been searching the human world all this time to try and find her, but they can't. And they basically, this is where they do it. 2 years have passed without much progress. Immediately the idea that I have is like, that's where you do your epilogue. Not just have it be like a panel here and there explaining like, oh, this group of characters all in this relatively small panel, here is their complete backstory, like, done. And instead, show us that over the course of like a chapter where we see maybe Norman go to his lieutenants, Vincent, Sislo, and so on. And they're a little bit more of a focus in one of the chapters and their idea to search for Emma. And we see what they're up to. You're showing that like the search for Emma is an important thing to everyone, but they're also going about their own lives in the world. So it acts as the epilogue to most of the characters while still being a progression of the plot. That's clearly the idea here, but it doesn't work because it's so compressed into just like 2 chapters. So they're all basically just like, she has to be alive, right? There's a reason we haven't found her basically, dead or alive. And they all think, we're destined to never see her again. And they're kind of questioning, like, so was separating her from us the reward for the promise? It's that sort of petty of a thing of, like, he just wanted this thing where we can't be together. Don gets angry at this, but then we bring up the idea of the forbidden zones, these places that they're not allowed to go into, and Norman explains. A country that doesn't exist anymore, countries that were destroyed by war or disasters, places that basically don't exist in this current year, which is exactly where Emma actually is. And this is where, again, probably the biggest failure, I think, of these final chapters is just that they don't actually explain how they're suddenly really allowed to go there. They just say that we got to these forbidden zone places of like Okay. And that's where like you wish like you had seen a little bit more of just the human world stuff, of them actually dealing with Mike Rattray, learning a little bit more about the human world in the end, and you know, developing the kids and their understanding of the world and the way it is, and showing that while they're all doing okay in the human world, it is something that is missing from their lives, not having Emma. And that's why it's so important for them to find her. That's what they needed to deliver on in the final chapters. And it's just, this, I really think could have worked, the core ideas of this chapter as a final chapter. But like a lot of other cases, like I think Bleach is probably the best example of this. The way Bleach worked is that it's probably the biggest example of a rushed editorial stuff getting in the way of the ending of a manga. In that, right in the middle of all the big action stuff, suddenly, all of a sudden, Ichigo just delivers a final blow to the villain and it's over. Out of absolutely nowhere, no setup whatsoever, just we resolve the present day conflict and then immediately move basically into the sort of, you know, final / epilogue chapter. And what I'd say about the ending of Bleach is that the actual, like, core of the final chapter, the kind of epilogue for the main characters and then the future epilogue when they show the characters as older, those kind of work as the, oh, these points that you want to hit with the characters in the ending. They're fine. The problem is how you did the very end of the plot. It felt like you just ended it all of a sudden. And I think that's the same thing here. Of they immediately moved from the plot is over, we're into the ending, when they should have made the ending kind of part of the plot here, so that it didn't feel as rushed. But yeah, they talk about, you know, we'll overturn destiny, and the theme of destiny, yes, it's here. Like, you can make the connections of, you link it back into what they did with Peter Rattray and his death, and the idea of he felt it was his destiny to continue on the legacy of the clan, to protect the world in his mind, to oversee the farms and so on. And even though Emma offered him the chance to come with them, he ultimately couldn't move on from his destiny. He couldn't move past it. I think you're also meant to view sort of Isabella in that way as well. She was given that chance to come with them, but ultimately in the end made that sacrifice to sort of, you know, die as their mother. And it's just that kind of tragedy of Isabella as a character, that she couldn't overcome that, you know, destiny of, like, so many of the cattle children before was to just die, and she didn't quite make it this far. But who have overcome their destiny is the kids, both in getting this far and then what they do in this ending of basically defying the one by, you know, reuniting with Emma and making it work. His last kind of final thing to take away from them all doesn't have the same impact that it could have. So I think it's there, but I don't think it was really presented over the last few chapters as being a particularly major plot point, but I get what they were trying to do. But yeah, anyway, so this is where we catch up with the end of the last chapter, and they're in the same place that Emma is. We see her up on the kind of top platform, and then we get the sort of spirits of characters past urging Ray to look in the direction of Emma. So I believe it is Yugo, Isabella, and then Connie, which makes sense. They're very fitting characters for all of them, just to sort of slightly switch the destiny up here of, ultimately, like, I suppose what the one said is that, like, your future connections with them will never happen. So them being pulled towards Emma is what moves past the idea that it was their destiny to basically go straight past each other and never find each other. But for some reason, Ray is drawn back to look in that direction. For some reason, Emma loses her necklace and has to go outside to pick it up and runs into Ray, who is running in that direction. So that's ultimately the question that you have here, and it's probably, I think, might be one of those ones worth discussing a little bit more of, like, wait, what is the actual significance of the necklace that Emma has? It was given to her by Mujika, as far as I remember, a bunch of chapters ago, ahead of the Kuvitadala arc. So this is ultimately this dragon's eye thing that links into the whole idea of Kuvitadala and the seven walls, and the idea of being able to, I think this was the eye that allowed you to sort of view anything you wanted. And this was how they sort of saw the one for the first time. And he told everyone that you have to find the right entrance. So come in properly through the 7 walls. Don't just basically view us type thing. So the question here is like, it's a necklace. Like, did it just fall off? Or what? And this is where like there is that thing of like destiny ultimately bringing them back together. And you maybe wonder, because immediately after this they go back into even more of the kind of flashback with the one, and you have this idea of, is this all the work of like the one? Did he meddle with this a little bit to sort of have Emma lose the necklace here to find them again? That he took this away from her, but then here's his subtle way of almost giving it back. Because ultimately within the series, in a way, the one is left very ambiguous, unexplained. Is he just meant to be viewed as this kind of god meddler character who does everything he does for entertainment? Or is there actually a sense of him being like, okay, I'll give you back something here? I'm not sure. Because if it is as simple as like she actually did just like lose it, it just fell, it's complete coincidence, does it work as well as kind of making something more out of everything else? But anyway, so we see that she reunites with everyone. They're shocked to see her. She is shocked to see them, because it's a whole group suddenly being like, you, Emma, like, and she just has no idea what's going on. This scene definitely, I think, works to just have complete joy and relief from so many characters, and Emma just be like freaking out, like, what's going on? Like you're crowding me, basically. And she treats them like strangers. This is the whole memory plot ultimately was leading up to a scene like this completely. And they note that like the numbers on her neck are gone, and like they're kind of questioning, is it Emma? Is it just someone that looks like her? But it clearly is, because Ray recognizes the necklace and so on. And this is where they figure out that you lost your memories, and we get the flashback to the one basically at this point. And I think it is pretty interesting at this point, because he says, you know, are you sure you'll be alone? The future that you want beyond this wish is to laugh and live with your family. So he's kind of asking her after she's basically said, yes, I'm fine with you taking everything of my family from me. And he's just asked, like, are you sure about this? Because what you want is what everyone else is going to get, but you aren't. And she notes, and I do like this as a note at the end of like, this isn't a sacrifice, it's settling things, settling my selfish requests. And a lot of those over the course of the series have been, I don't want to kill demons, I don't want to lose anyone anymore either. Her very optimistic, very idealistic views that so many other characters had issues with, of even back earlier on in the series, Ray and the whole idea of, we can't take more than maybe 4 of the best kids with us. The escape plan can't involve anyone younger than us, basically. But Emma putting her foot down, but ultimately in the end realizing that they'll have to leave the very young behind, but still getting most of what she wanted. She ultimately got what she wanted with the idea of, they got through it without having to slaughter every single demon, and without, in the grand scheme of things, losing that many of the group. And the group expanded as the series went on. And she's acknowledging here in the end of like, you know, in a way, I did all this stuff, like, I had such selfish views that I wanted, like, everything. Now is sort of the time, in a way, that this is this is the kind of response, this is to balance that out in a way of, like, this one thing I can't be overly optimistic with. I can't get happiness for everyone else and myself, so I'll take what we've managed to accomplish up to now in exchange for this. I do actually really like that, because it has been a little bit of a criticism I've seen from the fandom about a lot of what's happened, especially in the last arc, that everything did work out fairly okay for them in terms of like the fight with the queen, the whole, you know, battle basically in the palace and so on. No one of note particularly got killed apart from on the enemy side of things. All the kids really did make it out okay. As we find out, like they mentioned, like Chris is okay and stuff like that and so on. And she does note, of course I want to be with everyone, I don't want to forget them. This decision will probably anger them, which it does, of course. But this way everyone can go to the human world, there'll be no demons, no one will be food, they'll never have to be terrified, we'll never have to kill. Both humans and demons can be free. We can completely stop the tragedy that they've kept repeating up until now. From now on, everyone can live happily. Thank you. It's the best future I could hope for. And that's her point in all of this, of like, in her mind, just everyone else being happy is exactly what she wanted. And if she has to take a negative, she'll do that for them. And that's kind of been this thing across the series of like, initially Ray, Norman initially making the big sacrifice in the first arc of them giving him all the tools to escape on his own, but him coming back and giving them the tools to make the escape. His big sacrifice to make the escape go ahead. Then last minute, Ray is like, I'll sacrifice myself so that everyone else can get out. But then Emma got what she wanted there. This is Emma's kind of sacrifice moment in a way, even though she says it's not a sacrifice. It's just, this is her view of it. So I think that's actually like pretty well done. And it's where like, I'd never say that this chapter is like terrible or anything like that. It still has some really good stuff in it that, like I said, is absolutely the sort of content you would want in a final chapter. But the Emma and her memories plot needed time. By definition, it is a plot that needed time, and the fact that we basically only had a week with it as an audience, and anyone reading this in volume format or online or whatever, it's a flip of a page. Like, it's seconds between the revelation of her losing her memories and then her getting them back like pages later. That's where the issue comes in. So they're all emotional about the reaction of like, you've lost your memories. I do really like the Phil, tearing up of realizing just the extent of this, the fact that she looks at him without knowing who he is, that she pushes him away. That definitely hits, and it's one of those ones where, like, in terms of the anime, when they get to this point, that's going to be a powerful scene, to see the voice acting in that scene, to see the actual, how they animate some of those very heavy moments. So I think the anime could be kind of important going forward in terms of maybe expanding some of this stuff out. So that's why, like I'll say, like, I will be continuing to review the anime on my channel. So it's not just the end of Promised Neverland stuff on the channel. And I like Norman kind of coming in here. He gets his kind of opportunity to speak here. Ray was the one who sort of found her, but now Norman gets to speak and sort of change the opinion in a way on things. Thank goodness, he just views the positives. He takes the sort of Emma point of view. He, who was saved by Emma, her speech to him about like 30 chapters ago in the middle of the, just the first defeat of the Queen, in the aftermath of that, her speech saved him, basically. He was willing to drive himself into a grave to make this plan happen, but she brought him back on track, and now he is sort of bringing everyone around to sort of the positive view on this, that yes, we could be sad about her having lost her memories, but we found her again. She's alive. We're all here. We can adapt to the bad thing that's happened here. And that's the way we do things. We adapt. We always kind of work with what we have. That's always been like Emma's view on it as well, of like, oh no, this terrible thing has happened, but like on the other side of things, there's a positive to it. And Norman does that here. He's like, I'm glad you're alive, that you're healthy, eating well, smiling, and that you're not alone. He notes that the old man is there kind of with her, that she isn't just completely left by herself, that she was fine all this time, they were fine all this time, but they're better together. And he explains to her the backstory of like, we've all been well. And again, this is the thing of like, this speech here is the epilogue to the series. But imagine this stuff, which has happened in the last 2 years that they just skipped over. Imagine this was stuff we actually got to see as they covered, like, in detail, the search for Emma over those 2 years. What Emma was doing the last 2 years with the old man and so on. I think that would have been really cool, as opposed to just kind of dark, kind of in the background of some panels, relatively small panels, just really quickly, just Nigel's got a laptop, Jillian's cutting hair, Anna's in school, one of the other guys is into music now, and that type of stuff. You know, I think that there's an opportunity to do more with this, and that's where, like, here's a clear-cut example of, like, the anime. I'd be shocked if they do this note for note exactly how it's done here. This is complete room for expansion. Episodes covering what everyone else is up to, basically. Which I think is needed, because otherwise it makes it seem like, did the group literally just spend 2 solid years just hunting Emma down? Clearly that is not the case. They did what they could while still doing other stuff, and that they mention they all go to school, so they couldn't have possibly do that. They, in their free time, they search for Emma. So tell us more about their lives. That's where we're missing stuff in terms of time. You know, they note stuff like, okay, important, they had to mention this. The Adam's DNA stuff to suppress the Lambda experiment side effects was a success. That setup from a bunch of chapters ago, completely valid, and they could do it in the human world. Makes sense. Sislo, who got his arm bitten off by one of the demons, has an artificial leg. Barbara is fine and is a boxer now, apparently. I think. Cool. She was injured previously. She's fine. That's a lot of stuff that's, like, really good to see. The mass production farms, there was actually hope for all those kids. They weren't just this lost cause of, like, what do we do with them? But no. As the years go on, they'll improve, and that's good to see. They note that Mike Rattray he's a neutral person, so they're kind of like, he's not their best friend. They don't really view him as, like, a father figure or anything like that, but he's helping them, while still being somewhat, like, protective, I suppose. Chris woke up. Aishi doesn't want to kill Norman anymore and is living kind of happily. That's great. You know, quickly covering a lot of these more minor characters. You had a focus in, like, 1 or 2 chapters as we went through the series, but, you know, don't need the absolute focus. And then we sort of get into, in a way, the final speech of, you know, we're working to make it a bright future. I'm glad we were able to come to this world. We're all happy now. Everything's fine. It's just as you wished for. The results of your decision turned out to be great. So finally, you know, they've always been arguing with each other about, like, the validity of these sacrifices, but in the end, Norman notes that, like, your sacrifice here worked. We're going to make the best of it because you're here. That they've lost something important, like her memory of them, but, you know, they'll go again, basically. Everything we have, you gave it to us. You paid for it with everything you had. But even so, I wanted to be with you, have you smiling with us. And she's, you know, struggling. The feelings begin to come back. And again, this is where, like, this specifically, Emma's sort of, the only thing she sort of remembers is the feelings of missing them. This could have been better set up if we had had more chapters between the reveal of the memory loss and this final reunion type thing. As this is, it's like, okay, this connects to the previous chapter, but this would have been more impactful if there was a sense of, like, over, like, 4 or 5 chapters, like, the search for Emma is not going well, and Emma is becoming more and more, like, emotional about things. Like, she's constantly, like, misremembering them, and then as the chapters go on, you gradually have her be like, I can't, like, experience this all the time. And so at the point at which we're at here of, like, 2 years later, she's decided, like they covered, I think, towards the end of the last chapter, that, you know, a lot of those dreams went away. She stopped having those feelings and stuff like that. It seems like she's moving on, and that would have been really interesting to have multiple chapters, like, not really knowing in a way where they're going, because they're spending chapters and chapters with the group not finding her, with Emma on her own and no real hope. It would be impactful to have her finally just, in a way, move past them, kind of forget about them because she doesn't know what those emotions are, but then them to come back on this chance encounter. The problem is that the chance encounter feels super, super convenient when it's the chapter following the issue coming up. And again, they mention it here on this page, the necklace again, of, like, what is the significance here? It is connected to the One and the Seven Walls, Kavitadala, in some way. But what are they trying to say? Like, is this necklace this thing that allows her to retain some aspect of her past, or what? And she still knows, I don't know anything, I can't remember. But I do feel, it does feel warm, but also painful in my heart. I wanted to see you. I feel like I've always wanted to see all of you. And so the emotions do come back in. And then we get the kind of final speech. There was a future we wanted. There was a destiny we couldn't change. But we fought back and fought back. We grasped something. We lost something. The One, you'll never see your family again. So what? We wanted to see you too. We've missed you for so long. It's okay if you forgot, even if you can't remember, even if you're different from who you used to be. That's why, once more and forevermore, screw destiny. Let's live together, okay? And just with the idea of Emma is like, okay, I feel some sort of a connection with you. Let's start a connection here. Let's become friends, because there's something here. And there's this sense of, like, from both sides, they've wanted to reunite again. I think the only problem I'd have with this as a last page is that, like, it kind of feels weird to me to end a manga on a kind of 3-panel page and have the last panel be this, like, weird 3/4 panel that you have birds and none of them are in focus on the page. They're all sort of cut off. There's one, like, small in the corner. One is kind of close but cut off most of the side. And then on the other side, one was cut off. It's like, I get the idea of birds, freedom outside of the cage type thing, but that's a weird last panel. And just, as well, literally just ending on the words, let's live together. I'd be somewhat critical of ending on just, like, kind of an idea. It feels like it just ends mid-conversation. That, like, we don't even move a little bit ahead to sort of show them all living in the same, house. And, like, how they're going to accomplish this. Is it, as we suspect from the last chapter, just a case of they live with the old man because the place was abandoned and he would like to have people there? That would seem fitting to bookmark the series with the idea of them all living together in the house. One free, one not free. But it does just end in midair in my mind. And so that's the problem. It feels rushed. They did it too quickly. They didn't cover it over the course of enough chapters, when I think they could have made a very emotional and powerful arc out of just a handful of more chapters. And then the one thing I'd be sort of critical of the kind of ending is, I think just last page, they end on almost like too early of a note of just like, let's live together. The door has been opened slightly. We don't know the full context. It's just, you are meant to assume what happens going forward rather than being shown necessarily anything. And that's where I think they could have and should have done just a little bit more. Again, I felt like I was really critical there, but I think they're my sort of full thoughts on this, of like, the core is here. And I wanted so much to just kind of come in here and be like, I loved the last chapter, but there are problems. And this is coming from someone who hasn't really had any major problems with, like, the story direction for the last arc or two. I've been perfectly fine with a lot of the more fast-paced storytelling they've been doing, moving things along nicely, and not lingering on kind of needless stuff, I think. But this is a case where it does just feel rushed, that it felt like they were only told maybe 2-3 weeks ago, you need to wrap it up in this amount of chapters, and they barely got it done. And as you'd expect, no manga ends on just a, like, I think outwardly just bad note. the writer knows what the series is about and knows the general notes to hit. It's about delivering on them as effectively as possible. And again, I said this in the live reaction, I'll say it again. In my experience, mangas tend to not be the best at endings, full stop. In that, of most of the manga that I've read, I'd honestly say, especially of the bigger ones, that Naruto is probably one of the only ones where I was honestly very, very happy with the ending. A lot of other ones I often feel are just like, huh? What? In the sense of like Bleach, like I said earlier on, I actually like the last chapter. I think it's a fine look into the future epilogue style thing. But they completely messed up the end of the plot in terms of just ending the fights like the way they did, just in midair. Kind of like here. Add in a few more chapters to build towards the end of the fights. In the Promised Neverland's case, add in a few more chapters, just so there's a more of a journey to the reunion of everyone. And you hit a much better note. So, with that in mind, like, not expecting a stunning ending just because of the way a lot of anime and manga tend to end, I have to say I was somewhat disappointed, but not as much as some people. It's a weird kind of position to be in, of like, this has the core of what I would have expected from sort of an ideal last chapter, but just the execution prior to that I think wasn't there. But yeah, that's most of what I want to say here about the final chapter of The Promised Neverland. I'll just end on this note of like, sometime next week, I'm thinking either like Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday next week, I will have a video where I give more of my thoughts on the series as a whole. I don't know how long the video is going to be or what exact way I'll approach it, but it will be my initial thoughts on The Promised Neverland as a complete series, now that it is over now. So you'll get that video, and then like I said, I will be reviewing the anime as it comes out, season 2, 3 onwards, however long it is. And then I know there's other material out there. If we get sort of like official releases for like I know there are light novels, I think, for The Promised Neverland. If those get official English releases that I can like buy and have in hand, I will do reviews on them as well. So it's not the end of Promised Neverland content on the channel just because the last chapter came out. There'll be more to come, just not as regularly now that, of course, the series has come to an end as a weekly series. So, yeah, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the end of The Promised Neverland, this specific last chapter, how they did the ending, and I suppose in the video about the whole series as a whole later on next week, we can discuss more in the comments about our thoughts on the series as a whole. Well, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.